Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant General A.K. Singh from the Indian Army, the erstwhile Southern Army commander. And after 40 years of service, when I hung my spurs in end January 2013, was thereafter asked to take over the responsibility of Lieutenant Governor cum Administrator of the Union Territory of Andaman Nicobar Islands in July 2013, and later concurrently assumed charge of the Union Territory of Puducherry in July 2014. And that's really my locus standi for being here in front of you to give you a glimpse of these beautiful islands. Andaman Nicobar Islands have stood from times immemorial as a strategic outpost for the Indian subcontinent. And this has assumed greater importance after we became independent in 1947. But as India grew in stature and capabilities, the importance of these islands has increased. And today, some of us look at these islands as a springboard for India's interaction and for India's actualization of its policy of look east, act east, and now more recently, the growing importance of the Indo-Pacific region. In my over 3 years stay in the islands, I traveled to every nook and corner of the islands, understood the perspective, talked to all the people, traveled by air, traveled by sea, by road, sometimes even by motorcycle and even on foot, to get a very good idea of what these islands are, what they stand for, and how important are they to India in the 21st century. The islands are truly a strategic outpost of India, almost hugging Southeast Asia and dominating the Malacca Straits. To understand how important these islands are to India, we have to ask ourselves a simple question. What will be India's strategic position if these islands were not with us? And the answer will become clear. Let me start with a word about their history. The primitive tribes that inhabited these islands since 50,000 years at least are both of Mongolide origin and Negroid origin. These islands thereafter also find a mention in the Chola dynasty about 1,000 years back. There are also mentions in the Chinese travelogues and chronicles from the 13th century. In recent times, the Danes came here in 1755 and left soon after. The British came here in 1789 but could not stay beyond 1796 because of the inhospitable environment that existed there and the diseases that were prevalent. But they came back again in 1858 to establish a penal colony. And that penal colony was actually meant for the political prisoners of India's freedom movement. The cellular jail at Port Blair stands moot testimony to this. In fact, it is my belief that the soul of India's freedom struggle resides in these islands because of the political prisoners and what they had to go through. It's also become a place of pilgrimage for every Indian to visit the cellular jail in Port Blair. The islands were occupied by the Japanese during World War II in 1942 when the British vacated these islands. That phase of Japanese occupation is not much talked of, and there were many atrocities that were committed. But in 1945, as the World War ended, on 15th August 1945, the Japanese surrendered. In fact, their Admiral Teizo Hara and Major General Sato surrendered to India's Lieutenant Colonel Nathu Singh, CEO of 1/7 Rajput, aboard the Royal Naval ship Sandbar, HMS Sandbar. Post 1947, there were many claimants to these islands. Pakistan, Myanmar, Indonesia. There was also a voice that said that Britain should retain these islands, Falklands in the Atlantic and Andaman Nicobar in the Indian Ocean. But Sena Council prevailed and India's claim was recognized, and these islands joined the Indian Union in 1950. Incidentally, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose visited these islands in 1943, and the first flag of India was unfurled in these islands on 30th December 1943, a date that is commemorated every year. And I have unfurled that flag during my stay 3 to 4 times. Now, if you look at the next slide, you will get a very clear perspective of how these islands stand vis-a-vis their surroundings. If you see on the left of the slide, you will see that the distance from mainland India is about 1200 kilometers from Kolkata, Vizag and Chennai. Whereas the distance from Southeast Asia is just 163 kilometers to Indonesia, 500 plus kilometers to Phuket, and all along the coastline. So you can see the relative importance of these islands. These islands also are actually overlooking the Malacca Straits. Almost 1,000 ships pass to and fro under these islands. In fact, the Great Nicobar Islands, which is at the south. And let me give you an aside. When it's often said, when we talk of India's dimensions, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari in the south. And the people of Andaman take umbrage to that. The southernmost point of India is Indira Point in Great Nicobar Islands. So that's the perspective. It takes about 2 hours to fly from India. It takes about 50 to 70 hours to go by ship. And it just takes 30 minutes to go to Southeast Asia. In fact, before independence, the main logistical route to support these islands was through Burma. In the north on the slide, if you see, there is a place mentioned called Coco Islands. It's about 40 kilometers north of the last island group of Andaman that is called Landfall Island. The Coco group of islands, 40 kilometers north of Andaman, belong to Myanmar. And there are 3 islands, the Great Coco Island, the Small Coco Island, and the Tabletop Islands. And we believe these were leased out by Myanmar to China in 1994, though this is denied both by the Chinese as also by the authorities in Myanmar. We know that they have a listening post there, and on the Great Coco Island, they have also constructed an airstrip about 17 to 1800 meters in length. And we'll talk of this as we go along. Now, if you see the next slide, it shows the shipping lanes that pass through the Indian Ocean. These shipping lanes coming from the Cape of Good Hope in the south, from the Gulf of Aden, from the Straits of Hormuz, passing right between India and Sri Lanka or south of Sri Lanka, and then going towards the Malacca Straits, and those coming from the east to the Indian Ocean. If you look carefully, you will see that all these shipping lanes pass through 2 channels. The 10-degree channel that separates the northern Andaman group with the Nicobar group, or south of the Nicobar group, which is known as the 6-degree channel. So you can imagine the great strategic importance of these islands because of these control and domination of the shipping lanes. A word about the Indian Ocean. It's the 3rd largest ocean, has almost 7 choke points, has 40% of the world's population and almost 60% of global commerce activity. The Malacca Strait is actually the gateway to the Pacific, not only for goods and services that flow from the Indian Ocean to Pacific, but also the finished goods that come from Southeast Asia and China and Japan and goes on to the rest of the place. Now let me come to the details, some basic facts about Andaman Nicobar Islands so that you are quite clear. They are a group of 556 stroke 608 islands, islets and atolls. Now why these two figures? When I reached there, the figure was 556. Then it jumped to 574. The last I heard, they have now cited these atolls and islets keep emerging and submerging. So the last was 608. Now the fact to note is that out of so many islands, only 37 are inhabited. Only 37 are inhabited. The area of these islands is about 8,000 plus square kilometers. They stand majestically in the Bay of Bengal, 750 kilometers north to south, and about 40 to 50 kilometers in width. The population, as per the last census that was done in 2011, was approximately 3.81 lakhs, but would have increased to over 400,000 or slightly more. The tribal population stands at little over 28,000. Out of this, bulk of the tribes belong to the Nicobarese group, a Mongoloid group that stays and inhabits Nicobar group of islands. The balance are dispersed among the 5 very primitive tribes that also inhabit, and we'll talk of this as we go along. The total forest area of these islands is approximately 7,700 square kilometers, but it's to be noted that out of the total area of 8,500 square kilometers of these islands, almost 94% is forest, deemed forest or mangroves. And only 6% remains for revenue activity of the people who are now there in Andaman. The coastline is about 962 kilometers. Almost 1/4 of India's coastline is in Andaman. And 30% of India's exclusive economic zone is in and around Andaman Nicobar, almost 6 lakh square kilometers. The islands lie in seismic zone 5, that is the most vulnerable, and are subjected to almost 100 tremors in and around Andaman, out of which almost between 30 to 40 are more than 4.5 or 5 on the Richter scale. And that's an import of being more than that, because any tremor that is beyond that can technically trigger a tsunami. And we are all aware of the tsunami that hit these islands along with many other countries and India's mainland in 2004. The working season in these islands is very limited. The working season, in fact, is from November to May, just 7 months. The rest of the time, it pours and pours, it rains and rains. And these islands are subjected to both by the southwest monsoon and later in November, December. In fact, the southwest monsoon doesn't hit Kerala first, it hits the Andaman Nicobar Islands 15 days before that. And then the retreating monsoon in November, December, which brings in its wake large amounts of cyclones and other adverse effects. In fact, when I reached there, I was very conscious that in Uttarakhand, there were flash floods, and we had a lot of lives that were lost in 2013. And that time, the administration was virtually found missing. And when I reached Andaman, I was also made aware of the great devastation that occurred in 2004. So the first task I took upon myself was to tighten up the disaster relief mechanism, disaster mitigation, preparedness to face disasters. And we went through a 6-month series to prepare ourselves. And today I can say that Andaman Nicobar is the best prepared group of islands, or compared to any state in India, for disaster preparedness. In fact, in November 2013, we did an all India exercise that was attended by a whole lot of observers, including from the NDMA. And at the end of the exercise, they were all praised. Our manuals were taken away by other states to actually follow the same. And just a week after that, Andaman was hit by one of the worst cyclones called Lehar. I'm talking of 26 November 2013, whose ferocity and velocity of the wind along with lashing rain crossed 150 kilometers per hour. I was there in Rajnivas, suffered extensive damage. Large number of trees were uprooted in Andaman. Early morning, when I buzzed, I called for my ADC. I was told that except for the minimum staff, nobody is able to reach. All roads are blocked. The drivers were not there. So I asked the police people to take out their gypsy, which was the pilot vehicle, sat in that myself, asked my chief secretary to come down, took the ADG of police, the present, the erstwhile police commissioner Balaji was there. We three sat in the front gypsy, I drove, and that was followed by another police vehicle. Wherever there were trees, we lifted the vehicle virtually across. And soon the word spread. Our mechanisms came into being, and within 24 to 48 hours, Port Blair was back to almost normal. People could not believe their eyes. Let me give you a slight aside on the tsunami effect. Let's say earthquake or tremor occurs in Southeast Asia, somewhere in Indonesia, which is more than 7 or 8 on the Richter scale. Now, technically, it can generate a tsunami. Not necessarily, but technically, it can generate. There is a gap of about 20 minutes from the time that tremor takes place, plus minus few minutes, depending on its exact location, and before, if there is a tsunami, it hits Nicobar group of islands. So we have 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, you have to get to know, you have to disseminate, and you have to take the people away from the shore to the hinterland and higher areas. That was the challenge. There is an organization in Hyderabad called INCOIS that is on a world map and world communication. And they were then able to pick up this and transmit it to us within about 10 minutes. And I said to them, that's not good enough. And soon we interconnected all the deputy commissioners, police stations on this grid, and their input started reaching me and everybody else, including the control rooms, within 5 to 6 minutes. And thereafter, there was a system of alarms. The people were sensitized so that if those alarms were brought into being, the people would know that there is a tsunami threat and they would move indoors. That is the kind of level of preparation that we had engineered. And I'm sure it would have been bettered by now. Now let's look at the positive attributes of Andaman Nicobar. It's a unique, multicultural, multilinguistic society living with cohesive racial and religious harmony. A true representative of the Constitution of India. In fact, I maintain that there are two places which truly represent the ethos of our Constitution. One is the Indian Armed Forces and the second is Andaman Nicobar. Hindu-Muslim marriages are common and there is complete religious harmony. Of course, we have to be on our guard in modern times as things could spin off. How did these many people arrive here? Apart from the tribals, the first settlers were those who were the political prisoners in cellular jail. After 10 years, 20 years in the jail, when they came out, they had no contact with their homes. They didn't know. They decided to settle there. After independence, as a policy decision, the government of India decided to settle a large number of people in these islands. So the term mini India is often used for the population of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And there are a large number of languages that are spoken there. Though, of course, the connecting medium is Hindi and English. It's a largely peaceful society, and crime rates are very low, and the crimes that occur are low-level crimes. There are progressive social indicators. Both health and education are better than the national average. And I will talk how I added to that. There is absence of environmental pollution, and it's in fact one of the best hotspots in the world. Only if you visit Andaman, you can realize the richness of these islands and the way they contribute to the richness of our environment. Rich in natural resources, especially marine and forest. But, the forests also, as is the want everywhere in the 20th century, there was a large amount of logging that was going on, and these forests started diminishing. The islands have great strategic significance. I've already covered that. And there's great potential for fisheries and tourism. Let me just give you an idea. As far as tourism is concerned, when I reached there in 2013, there were about annually 200,000 tourists who were visiting these islands. By the time I left in 3 years, this figure had crossed 400,000, but in a very controlled manner. There was a great debate as to how much tourism we should allow, what kind of tourism. And obviously, it had to be ecologically aligned and something that would also benefit the people of the island, and we'll talk of it. Fisheries, the estimated catch in and around, exploitable catch, which is sustainable, is about 150,000 tons annually. And we are only harvesting 37,000 tons. So that's the kind of potential that exists in these islands. What are the challenges that you face in these islands? The first challenge is the remoteness of these islands. And that remoteness causes huge problems of transportation and communication. Let me talk of transportation. Transportation to these islands is from mainland India is either through air, and there are flights which come from Delhi, Calcutta, Vizag, Chennai, even Bangalore or Mumbai. But the prices of the tickets skyrocket during the season. We tried our best to control those prices. In fact, sometimes they are a great dampener on the tourism, because it may be easier to reach Southeast Asia from Delhi than to come to these islands. The second is by ship. You'll be surprised to know that Andaman Nicobar administration runs the largest number of ships in India, 84 to be precise. Out of that, 5, later 2 were decommissioned. There were 3 ships which run from mainland to the Andaman Nicobar Islands, a journey of 50 to 70 hours. A carrying capacity of around 1,500 passengers and goods. Then you have inter-island vessels. These vessels run not only within the group of Andaman and Nicobar, but also between Andaman and Nicobar, crossing the 10-degree channel, which is actually quite turbulent. And then you have foreshore vessels which run from one part of the island to another. And of late, we've had some very good commercial vehicles which have been imported by private players for tourism purposes. So from Port Blair, you go to Havelock, and it's been renamed now. You can go through a ship called Macruse, and I'm sure there are many more which are as modern as they can get. Obviously, for the islanders, this travel was subsidized. And they paid only a fraction of what they should have for the ship movement. My vision was that I should take this subsidy from the ships and bring it to the air, because nobody has the time of 70 hours for this movement. Similarly, the administration also provided subsidy for goods that were coming from the mainland. Because if we didn't provide that subsidy, they will become prohibitive for the common man. Coming to communications. When I reached there, the communication was only through satellites. And we had a bandwidth for the complete Andaman Nicobar Islands of about 300 to 400 Mbps only. So after a lot of noise and all, we hired some transponders on foreign satellites and we raised it to 1 GB. And then we took up a project for an undersea cable from Chennai to Port Blair and 5 other islands. By the time I left, that had been sanctioned and work was to start. In August 2020, that undersea cable was commissioned. And today, Andaman Nicobar boasts of almost 400 GB capacity. And let me tell you, it makes a difference in their day-to-day life. It makes a difference in providing services, makes a difference in providing administration. It makes a difference in doing commerce. For example, in my view, Andaman Nicobar are the best place for the services sector. They have very educated people. They are multilingual. There are no trade union problems, no labor issues. And with a view to enhance our potential for the services sector, I had started foreign language courses. At least in my time, we had started on Japanese and German. English and Hindi, of course, and other local languages are widely spoken. High input costs. Most of the material has to come from outside. And I told you that if you want to go through a big project, you need to import timber and sand from outside when it is available in abundance. That is with a view to ecological preservation of these islands. Of course, it irks the people, but I think under Supreme Court guidance, everything has now been put in a framework and you cannot overexploit these islands. Limited land availability of only 6% land is now becoming troublesome because families have multiplied and what was initially available to them is no longer suffice for the expanded family, and there have been new people who have been coming in, settlers from outside, some unauthorized. There is talk of a large number of settlers from outside India also sneaking in. That's not only a load on the islands, but also a security concern. And we have to periodically keep monitoring that. Delay in issuance of environmental clearances was indeed a roadblock not only for day-to-day life, but also for security. I remember we had to establish some radars for surveillance and the environmental clearance was stuck. We have two volcanoes there. A barren island, which is India's only active volcano. It keeps erupting from time to time. And the second one, which is extinct, is Narcondam. So we wanted to place something on Narcondam and somebody said that the bird in Narcondam will get disturbed. The birds in Narcondam will get disturbed. So, of course, things have been more streamlined now and those permissions have been given. There are limited avenues for growth in Andaman. In fact, one of my biggest challenges was I realized that there is a lack of the spirit of free enterprise. And the government is the provider of everything. Everything is subsidized. There is a great subsidized culture, which rightly, most of it is well-deserved, but I think some of it can be streamlined. Also, the people prefer government jobs. It gives them greater security. And there is also an island mentality that anybody who belongs to the island, however highly accomplished he may become, doesn't want to leave the islands, is not able to use his education qualification to full potential, preferring a low-level job. And there is a limitation of how much can the government employ. Of course, with a little bit of persistence, some of our people have started going out and have made a name for themselves. I encouraged a lot of enrollment in the armed forces. When I reached there, the enrollment was just about less than 10 in single figures. In the second year, I got 84 people enrolled through a special drive. When I had to actually talk to the parents to assure them that I would personally look after their interest. And I spoke to all the center commandants to tell them that be gentle to start with. They are coming out from Andaman and need a little reassurance. So through various means, we were able to arouse that spirit, though fully not yet aroused. Vulnerability to disasters, I told you, the tsunami of 2004 left 7,000 dead in its wake. It was Christmas time and most of the Nicobarese had had a Merry Christmas and were lying on the beaches when the tsunami hit them. Mind you, there are stories which suggest that the primitive tribes actually sensed it because of their past folklore that passed on to the present generation, and there were not so many casualties there. 7,000 people died and many more thousands were injured. And you can see the devastation and the ferociousness of this tsunami. Do you know that Andaman Nicobar Islands has risen after that tsunami half a meter in the north and has submerged half a meter in the south across 750 kilometers. This is something that may not be known to many people. The whole island in the north has risen half a meter and then gradually coming to the southernmost portion has sunk in almost half a meter. There are security concerns and I will talk of them as we go along. Now let me come to a very interesting thing, the centers of gravity. See, with resources being scarce, there was always a competitiveness for the same resource between various stakeholders. And sometimes these became at loggerheads with each other. For example, the people wanted development, but there were ecological issues, there were tribal issues, and there were security concerns. And so I was dealing with this kind of disharmony all the time. So one day I decided that let me put it in perspective. So I called a meeting of almost 50 to 75 of the top citizens who were active in Port Blair, and journalists, administration people, the chief secretary, everybody was there. And I posed a question to them. I had worked on it the previous evening. I explained to them what is the center of gravity. It is the key point on which you focus. We talk of it in security. We also talk of it in normal day-to-day life. So I asked them a question. What is the center of gravity of Andaman Nicobar? I got varied answers. Somebody said the strategic security. Somebody said the people. Generally, in democracies, the people are the center of gravity. They are the focus for the government. Somebody said, no, it's the ecology. So after a good discussion, I said, no. Normally, you identify one center of gravity, but in Andaman, that will not be correct. I said, in Andaman, there are 4 centers of gravity. 4 centers of gravity: the strategic security, the people, the ecology, and the tribals. And these 4 centers of gravity have to live in harmony with each other and not at odds with each other. And with that being propagated, I think we were able to bring some semblance of a harmony. And let me explain each of these centers of gravity one by one. As far as the strategic significance is concerned, I will be able to cover it in greater detail as we go along. Let me come to the people. I explained that settlers from all over India had been settled here. The government had an obligation towards them because we had brought them. They had actually made these islands habitable, living in jungles, clearing jungles, and making them what they are. And therefore, they had hopes and aspirations, and the government had obligation towards them. But there was a limit. While they may have wanted X amount, we had to ensure that that was in harmony with security, ecology, and tribal issues. Next, you come to the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. And let me elaborate. This is a good time to elaborate on that. I told you that Andaman Nicobar is inhabited by almost 28,000 plus tribals. Bulk of them, around 28,000, are the Nicobarese. And they are virtually in the mainstream, though they enjoy protection still. You cannot just go into Nicobar. You need a sanction. Of course, all Indians will be given that sanction. But foreigners find it very difficult to travel to Nicobar Islands. They've joined the police, they've joined the administration, they've become doctors, so they are virtually in the mainstream. Though they still need, in my view, they still need support and protection. But the balance 500 odd are the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. And these were the Ongis, the Great Andamanese. These two were the largest numbers, were decimated before independence due to wrong policies. And really, you can't turn back the clock, but there are just a handful left. The other three, and they are given full protection by the administration and through laws of the tribal ministry. I will talk of just two others. One is what most of us would have heard, the Jaravas. I will also talk of the Sentinelese. And of course, there's the third group, Shonpens, who live in Great Nicobar. So let me talk of the Jaravas. They are about 425 in number. They stay north of Port Blair in a reserved tribal area of about 1,000 square kilometers on both sides of the road. Incidentally, there's a Andaman trunk road that runs from Port Blair right to the north, North Andaman, approximately 343 kilometers. And sometime back, before I arrived, these Jaravas had become a source of tribal tourism. They stay naked. And therefore, anybody who went there, apart from going to the beach and cellular jail, also wanted to travel on that road so that they could catch glimpse of these. They are of Negorite origin. So that has been put a stop to. You cannot, it's an offense if you interact with the Jaravas. And also the traffic on that Andaman trunk route through the Jarava territory has been regulated. You cannot go at your own sweet will. There are convoy systems which go twice a day up and twice a day down. But people are still hopeful of catching the glimpse. The great debate about the Jaravas, as also the rest of the tribal community, was how should we assimilate them into the mainstream? Now, there were two clear-cut views on this. One view said that leave them as they are happy. Don't disturb them. Any touch of modernization has always been suicidal for such societies. The other view said, who are we to deny them the fruits of modernization? Their children see the aircraft. They should aspire to fly one. There is a right to education. Why shouldn't their children get educated? And the anthropologists were totally divided on this issue. And I had a good advisor, Dr. Pandya from Ahmedabad University. He was very passionate. We also had a group called AAJVS, Atam Janjati Vikas Samiti, a group of 30-40 people employed by the administration who could speak the language with Jaravas. And they used to interact with them. So I called a meeting of world-renowned anthropologists, even those who were let's say, criticism of there was a huge criticism. In fact, we learned that was an industry of criticizing and earning funds for protecting the Jaravas. So I called everybody. Somebody was not given permission. I said, okay, send your paper, we'll present the paper. So over 2 days, this was deliberated on. And in my discussion with Dr. Pandya, I got to realize that the anthropologists will never agree to a common minimum view. So when I went at the end of it, 2 conflicting views, as I mentioned, were put across to me. And then I said that I've given it a thought. And what we will now do is redefine the way I said we have to move forward. We have to move forward by ascertaining the will of the Jaravas in the manner they can communicate with the people they are comfortable in communicating with. Where do they want to go? At what pace do they want to go? And let me give you an example. Their women and men, they remain naked in the forest. They live in communes, big huts where all of them live together. So we got a demand through these Samiti, AVS, that the women wanted clothes. So this was vetoed by the administration. Then I called the chief secretary. God bless him, Anand Prakash, he is no more. But he was a progressive man. And he said, sir, let's try. Dr. Pandya also agreed. So we got cellular clothing which could breathe in the jungle. And we gave it to the ladies. Now you won't believe that they were so sensible. They used to stay without any clothes in the jungle, but whenever they crossed the road where there was traffic, they would put on these clothes and they would go and put them back. We started some low-level education program for their children. There was a barter. To maintain the dignity of the Jaravas, we started a barter system. They used to make baskets and very many other things. They would bring them and we would give them in return what they needed. They wanted some implements, they wanted rice and things like that. But we also ensured that they got their children. And we created a mixed lipi, almost Roman Hindi kind of lipi with their language. And it's called Ang. And through that, we started communicating. Then for internal disputes, policing the Jarva area, we tried to create their own law and order machinery. Of course, it wasn't most effective, but at least there was a semblance. But there was a constant struggle of the developers or the people who were living outside the tribal areas, going and intermixing with them, with tragic consequences. Once issue, and I'm narrating it because these are the kind of things that confronted us on the tribal issues. Let me talk of the Sentinelese. They've been in news. If you recollect, in November 2018, an American called John Chow, an evangelist, went there unauthorizedly and was killed, and it made world news. Well, North Sentinel Island is an island about 40 kilometers southwest of Port Blair. So when you fly from Port Blair to Chennai, you overfly that island. It's about 60 square kilometers, 7 by 8 kilometers. And the Sentinelese, approximately 60 to 100, we don't know the exact number, live in that island in complete isolation. And there have been attempts earlier by the administration to strike a talk with them, but it was rebuffed. And we lost a number of people. So therefore, in the 90s, the government of India, tribal ministry, gave out a policy which said hands off. That means, so we seized all contact with that island. And the Sentinelese continued to stay there. So one day in the briefing, I asked my chief secretary, I said, CS, who's responsible for the safety and security of these Sentinelese? So he said, sir, we haven't thought of it, but if it has to be somebody, it will be you. I said, how can I be held responsible when you tell me that the policy is hands off? I'm not supposed to do anything. So how can I be held responsible? I said, that's not on. I said, please take up a case with the government of India to change this policy from hands off to eyes on. I said, we'll not interfere, but let's see. What about a whole lot of these poachers come from various places? What if they come and poison them? What if there's a wildfire in the island and there are huge casualties? How will we know? So that was accepted by the government of India, and the present policy is hands off but eyes on. And therefore, we make periodic forays through helicopters and ships. Ships maybe once in a couple of months and helicopters once a month on and around the island. So that is the way that the tribal population, but there is a commitment of the government of India, of the people of India, because it was their land to start with, that we will have to continue to protect them and give them the protection that they need, and take them forward in a very, very slow and measured manner at the pace that suits them. Last but not the least, I'll come to the ecology. Let me give you some statistics that will surprise you. In 8,500 square kilometers, the total area of Andaman Nicobar, there are 96 wildlife sanctuaries. There are 9 national parks. There are 2 marine national parks, and there is 1 biosphere reserve. Now you see the dimension of ecological protection. And I think this is a continuous battle to protect that ecology and ensure that it remains one of the best hotspots in the world after the Amazon. When you go to land in Andaman, as your aircraft approaches Port Blair and comes down, you can see the bottom of the ocean. Many schemes were started by us, the administration, with the willing help of the people, to ensure that all the waste that is generated in these islands is taken away to the mainland. So transportation of this waste was made free. So there were many entrepreneurs who collected the waste and took it to the mainland to earn their living. And in the bargain, we also ensured that Andaman Nicobar was lessened of its load of waste. Of course, it's a continuous battle. Radhanagar beach in Havelock has been rated as the best beach in Asia, one of the top 5 in the world. That's the kind of... and this poses a challenge for tourism. When I reached there, I was told that yes, we were focusing on high-end tourism. I said, look, how will that benefit the locals? What we need is to not only encourage some high-level tourism. We got, incidentally, the first 5-star resort of Tata's there. And it was a Herculean task to get them, and the government has floated some more tenders now. But I said the mid-segment tourism also needs to be encouraged, which should be ecologically aligned. You know, when the middle sector tourist comes, he provides gainful employment to a taxi driver, to a tour operator, to the small resorts that are around. And that's how tourism, in fact, apart from fisheries, is one of the mainstays of the economy of Andaman Nicobar. So I explained to you that these 4 centers of gravity have to learn to live in harmony with each other and not at the expense of each other. Okay, let me now come to my vision. On the slide, you will see my vision has been laid out. And this was laid out by me after touring the islands extensively. And I'm sure that most of it is still there and that the administration is working towards it. And the focus areas, of course, there was some mandatory expense, like shipping took away almost 20% of our budget. But I ensured that health and education were given great importance. We devoted almost 6.5% of our budget, total budget, to health and 11.5% to education. Total of 18%. Nowhere in India you devote. And let me tell you the advantage. Let me first talk of health. Health is free there for all the people and visitors. There was enough infrastructure, very good infrastructure down to the panchayat level. But there were no doctors. We had almost 40 specialists who were missing. So we had an arrangement with the CGHS here that they would send doctors on 3-month rotation. But even they wouldn't come. So for every small consultation, people had to travel to the mainland. So I asked somebody as to what's the solution. They said, sir, the only way doctors will come here is if you can start a medical college. I said, look, why don't we try? He said, sir, it's been tried and it just doesn't take off. So I got an army general who had retired from the Army Medical Corps. I got him there as a consultant and told him, you have one task. In this 1 year, you start a medical college. He said, sir, impossible. I said, no, that's why I've called you. He said, sir, but then I have to be given a free hand and full support. I said, I will personally monitor. I made the chief secretary and the health secretary responsible. And we started a medical college in 1 year. You know, just to give you an idea, almost 125 professors came. And how did we get them? We reached out to the retired people from the army and government services and other doctors and told them, we'll give you accommodation. Your children are settled, husband, wife, please come here. Stay for 1 year. Andaman used to be, prior to this medical college, allotted about 8 to 10 seats in various medical colleges around the country. Today, 94 children of Andaman go to that medical college. The first batch has just passed out. We will have surplus of doctors to provide to the rest of the country. Even then, there was a problem of super specialization, which was to come up later, but we had to send people for treatment to the mainland. And it was very costly. You know, first the airfare, stay arrangements, and then expenditure. And most of the people are low-income people there. So I asked my health secretary, I said, why don't we start an insurance scheme? So he said, sir, there was a scheme that was worked on, but it fell through because we couldn't afford it. It was for all the population of Andaman whose annual income was below 3 lakhs. And they were to be covered for up to 5 lakhs treatment on the mainland. So I said, how much was the expenditure? He said, sir, it was about 40-50 crores, which we found in our budget too prohibitive to support. So I said, why don't we run it ourselves? So, you know, nobody wants extra job, but finally I forced it. We created a cell and we ran it. For the same terms, you won't believe that we brought down the cost to annually 6 crores only by running it ourselves. It was called the Anishi scheme. It was the first of its kind in the country. Way back in 2015, it was announced. The government of India has now announced a scheme for people's insurance, but 2015, we had the first scheme going there. Talk of education. Their literacy rate is almost 100%. Technically, it is around 90 plus because the older generation, there were large numbers who were not educated. Today, everybody is. There are private schools, but bulk of it is because Andaman is not big cities, big villages. There are small hamlets all over. So the government schools run there. And one day in a presentation, I was surprised to discover that we run these schools in 5 languages. We don't teach 5 languages, we run the complete school in 5 languages: Hindi, English, Bengali, Tamil, and Telugu. And I said, it's okay in the junior classes, but what happens in the secondary classes, especially for science and commerce, there are no books in these languages. So the teachers would get books in Hindi, English, translate and talk to the people. I said, what about their employment? The only possible employment was to become a teacher in that language with limited vacancies. So I raised it in the Lieutenant Governor's Advisory Council. And I said, look, let's change this. And I was cautioned because it's a very sensitive issue. It's linked to our culture. We can't change it. So I said, okay. I called a meeting of all the parents. And I realized that the parents want to see their children do well when I explained it to them. And there were one or two of the panchayat members who were there. And I had done some homework. So one of them who was objecting vociferously, I asked him, I said, where does your child study? It was in an English medium school in Bangalore. So I said, don't deprive these people. So I started another college because there was shortfall. We started an arts college. We also started a law college there and many other such things on vocation. So the focus on medical for the present and education for the future. And I think that focus continues. It is a very right focus which will benefit the islanders a great deal. Okay, now lastly, let me come to the security challenges. Let me first talk of what are the threats to Andaman. We'll talk of the conventional threat. While there may have been a conventional threat immediately after independence, there were some claimants, but today there is no conventional threat, even though there are a large number of islands. The maritime boundaries of Andaman Nicobar are totally delineated and there is no dispute with 5 other neighbors. So while technically you can say somebody can come and occupy an island, today India's stature is such, our capabilities are such that we'll throw out that somebody. But there are peacetime threats, threats of illegal immigration, threats of the boat people going towards Australia, finding shelter here, threats of poaching, threats of terrorism emanating from Southeast Asia. Of course, there has been no incident, but there have been threats. So these are the kind of threats that we deal with. And for these threats, and also for the conventional, we have a 3-tiered system. On the outer tier is the Andaman Nicobar Command, mainly the Navy and the Air Force, and I'll talk of that slightly later. On the second tier is the Coast Guard, and finally, nearer to the land, you have the Marine Police, the Main Police, and the Indian Army that is available there. What is the status of Andaman Nicobar Command from the security perspective? In 2002, we established India's first tri-service operational command called the Andaman Nicobar Command in Port Blair. It has 4 components, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Coast Guard. The Army has a brigade there, the Navy and the Air Force, their equipment, vessels, aircraft. But the debate has been twofold. One debate or one argument is that let's keep Andaman Nicobar as the eyes and ears of India. And therefore, what you need mainly there is surveillance. And let the forces remain on mainland India, and whenever there is a threat or some basic forces can be there, but the others can be flown in. The counter argument is that it's become too important a place today to leave it. It also, you have to take into account, it takes 2 hours to fly down aircraft. It takes 50 hours to get ships there. And therefore, rightly, the Andaman Nicobar Command should be empowered with its own capabilities. And so, 2 plans have been drawn up. One is a short-term plan and one is the long-term plan. The short-term plan focuses on basically surveillance and infrastructure, as does the long-term plan. Surveillance has been greatly enhanced through use of radars and modern surveillance aircraft, UAVs. But as far as the infrastructure is concerned, our main focus has been to develop infrastructure so that additional forces, as and when brought to Andaman Nicobar, can be easily housed. And that includes establishing airfields, both in North Andaman, South Andaman, getting interception capabilities with the Navy and the Air Force. Of course, the fate of the Andaman Nicobar Command is not yet clear, with the theatres now coming into being, and maybe it may merge with the maritime theatre as and when it comes about. Talk of the Malacca dilemma and the Chinese. The Chinese have been making reasonable number of forays into these islands of late. Their submarines, their survey ships have been sighted, and as per laws of sea, we've been telling them we have all the inputs. China, as you are aware, has from a brown water navy about a decade back has turned into a blue water navy. Almost 80% of their commerce flows through the Malacca Strait. That includes their oil and their exports, both to and fro from the Indian to the Pacific Ocean. And that's why it is of critical importance to the Chinese. Often you hear people talking that India has a great advantage through Andaman Nicobar, can block the Malacca Straits whenever there is a requirement. Let me give you my views on it. You know, there are laws of the sea and there are sea commons. It's not easy that anybody can go and block any place. In fact, if you block a port, it's an act of war. And if you block a strait, you're affecting not one country, but you're affecting the communication and transportation of a large number of countries. Yes, Malacca Straits can be blockaded by India, but not in the manner that it is suggested. If there is a very serious conflict with China on the land, Chinese Achilles heel is at Malacca Strait. And India has the capability, but it will be a very conscious, deliberate political decision of the government of India. And it's a strategic deterrence that is in place, and Chinese are very sensitive to this. So that's my view on the blockade and importance of Malacca Straits. The Andaman Nicobar Islands, to talk of their importance, can be considered like an unsinkable aircraft carrier for India. Let me just talk of two other things. One is the Cocoa Islands. I talked of them. Even though it is denied, it is leased out to China and basically used for monitoring activities. So we keep note of that, and we have taken that into account. But there is another project of concern called the Kra Isthmus project. It's the narrowest part of Thailand. And 3 centuries back, there was a proposal by the British to make a canal through this isthmus so that they would avoid the Malacca Straits and come out straight into the Andaman Sea. That project has of late not been revived, but interest has been shown as part of the BRI project. There was some news indicating that the Chinese, along with the Thai army, was interested in reviving that project at a cost of $30 billion. I mean, they had committed $30 billion. But the opinion in Thailand is divided, and so far no sanction has been given. It's a huge project. The amount of excavation work there is almost 5 times of what was done for Suez Canal and Panama Canal. Of course, it will ease the blockade of Malacca, but even then, the importance of Andaman will remain because the traffic will flow through the Andaman Sea, which again is dominated by Andamans. So you can see the strategic importance of Andaman Nicobar vis-a-vis the security situation, not only in the Bay of Bengal, but also relating to the Indo-Pacific.